Readings of Almighty God's Words. The responsibilities of leaders and workers. The responsibilities of leaders and workers. 2. Throughout people's experience of believing in God, they often encounter some difficulties, and false leaders cannot resolve any of them. False leaders can't even resolve certain obvious difficulties that could be fixed with just a few words. And they also make a big fuss over them and turn every small issue into a big deal. Some people are not evil. It's just that in terms of their humanity, they slightly lack manners, don't understand basic etiquette, and are a bit scummy. False leaders take these minor issues and make a big fuss over them, getting the brothers and sisters to discuss them, criticize them, and condemn them, all with the aim of leaving a lasting impression on those people, so that they won't dare to keep acting that way. Is this necessary? Is this a way to resolve problems? Is it using the truth to resolve issues? As long as there are no major issues in someone's humanity, and that person is not evil and can sincerely expend themselves, then, under circumstances where they are accepting, it is sufficient to continue to work on them, offering them reminders, assistance, fellowship, and support. If people consistently behave in this way, then they have a problem with their character or a vicious disposition, and stern pruning and discipline are then necessary. If they refuse to accept this, either their duty should be suspended or they should be cleared out. False leaders cannot see through to this, nor will they act in this way. When they encounter such evil people, they treat them as brothers and sisters, offering them help and support. Is this doing work? Is it using the truth to resolve issues? The work of false leaders is absurd, childish, and laughable, and nothing about it aligns with God's intentions. In everything they do, you can see that they are laymen. They lack spiritual understanding and act recklessly without principles. Similarly, they cannot see through to or accurately grasp the various difficulties that people encounter in their life entry. Consequently, their attempts at resolution seem incredibly clumsy, foolish, and like those of a layman. Those who accept their help also feel awkward and repressed. Over time, some even lose faith, saying, "The leader has fellowshipped with me so many times, so why haven't I changed? Why do I keep relapsing? Is it the case that my humanity is especially poor, and I'm incapable of being saved?" Some even harbor doubts, saying, "Is there something wrong with my spirit? Are evil spirits at work in me? Is God not going to save me? Doesn't that mean I'm without hope?" These are the consequences of the work of false leaders. In their work, they confuse one thing for another, and they act in a ridiculous, absurd, foolish, and clumsy way, which ultimately leads the various difficulties faced by some people who genuinely pursue the truth to not be resolved in a prompt manner. This, in turn, causes weakness and negativity to arise in those people, as well as some notions and misunderstandings about God and His work. They say, "I've read so many of God's words, so why can't my problem be resolved?" Can God's words really save and transform people? Their hearts give rise to doubt, and they get trapped in confusion. Therefore, when false leaders do work, they do not produce many positive results, but they do give rise to quite a lot of negative and adverse things. Their work not only fails to dispel people's notions, doubts, and judgments about God. On the contrary, it increases their misunderstandings and guardedness regarding God. Even after many years of faith, these people's issues remain unresolved. While they are being misled and misguided by false leaders, their misunderstandings and guardedness regarding God deepen. This being the case, can they attain life entry? False leaders' understanding of positive things, such as the truth and man's dispositional change, can influence many people's viewpoints and attitudes toward positive things. It's one thing when false leaders don't do any work. As soon as they start working, deviations emerge and adverse consequences arise. An improper atmosphere comes about in these churches. That is, some erroneous and absurd sayings are often produced, and people there do not understand spiritual terms that are frequently mentioned in God's words or know how to apply them. While the so-called spiritual terms and sayings often spoken by these false leaders are spread widely throughout these churches. The impact these things have on people isn't small. They not only cannot help people gain a more practical and accurate knowledge of God's words and the truth, or enable them to find an accurate path of practice in His words. On the contrary, they actually make people have a more distorted, theoretical, and doctrinal knowledge of the truth, and at the same time, they make people more hazy about the path of practice. In doing so, false leaders interfere with people's line of sight and affect their pure comprehension of the truth. What effect do false leaders have in doing these things? What role do they play? While characterizing them as disturbing and disruptive might be somewhat excessive, calling them buffoons rushing all over the place is not an overstatement at all. When I had just begun this stage of the work, I met some individuals, and while I was listening to them talking, one of them asked about a person's situation, and someone suddenly blurted out the words, "They've burned to ashes." When I asked, "Burned to ashes? What does that mean?" They responded, "Being burned to ashes means that someone has been dismissed and perhaps stopped believing." I said, "This is a pretty cruel term. It doesn't give the person any leeway." Did I ever say such a thing? How did I not know about this term? I have never defined anyone this way, or stated that if someone stops doing their duty or departs from God, they are burned to ashes. How did this term come about? Later, I found out that this phrase originated from an elderly believer, an old pedant. He was very learned, had believed in God for a long time, and he had seniority. When he spoke this phrase, That group of muddled people did not exercise discernment and learned it from him, and it became a popular phrase. Do you think this phrase is correct? Does it have a basis? Is it accurate?
No, it's not accurate.
How should we treat it? Should it be allowed to persist in the church?
No, it shouldn't.
It should be exposed and criticized and resolved from its root. Afterward, through criticism and dissection, these muddled people didn't dare to keep saying it. But a few uninformed individuals may still be secretly using it in private. Those people may think it is a very spiritual phrase originating from a well-known figure and believe it should continue to be used. Have your leaders engaged in similar practices? Have they negatively affected your life entry, dispositional change, or the path that you walk?
In the past, when spreading the gospel, a false leader once said, "God conquers us through judgment and chastisement. So when we spread the gospel to religious people, we need to speak to them in a harsh tone and lecture them. Only then can they be conquered."
This statement may sound reasonable, but does it align with the truth principles? Did God instruct people to do this? Does God's word say, "When widely spreading the gospel, you must rise up and govern people with an iron rod, using judgment and chastisement to spread the gospel widely"?
No.
So, where did this statement come from? Clearly, it's a theory imagined out of the head of a false leader who lacks spiritual understanding. On the surface, this statement may seem like it is unproblematic. All of mankind must undergo God's judgment and chastisement. If they can't directly receive it from God's words, can't they receive it indirectly? In any case, that is the effect that God's words are meant to achieve, conquering all mankind. Wouldn't it be better for them to receive this sooner rather than later? Before God acts, we'll take this preventative measure so that people can develop a kind of immunity. Then, when God truly judges and chastises them, those people won't rebel against, oppose, or betray God. This will prevent God's feelings from being hurt. Isn't that a good thing? On the surface, every sentence appears correct, and doctrinally speaking, it seems logical. However, is this a truth principle? What stipulations does God's house have for the spreading of the gospel? Does it require people to do this?
No.
Therefore, this theory is not valid, and the person who proposed it is a false leader. False leaders often feign being spiritual, uttering some specious fallacies to mislead and misguide people. While these fallacies may sound unproblematic on the surface, they have a detrimental influence on people's life entry, disturbing, misleading, and obstructing people from walking the path of pursuing the truth. Because of these pseudo-spiritual words, some people develop doubts and resistance toward God's words. They produce notions and even misunderstandings about God and guardedness against God, and then drift away from Him. This is the impact that the pseudo-spiritual sayings of false leaders have on people. While members of a church are being misled and influenced by a false leader, that church becomes a religion, just like Christianity or Catholicism, in which people merely observe the sayings and teachings of man. They all worship the teachings of Paul, going so far as to use his words in the place of those of the Lord Jesus, rather than following the way of God. As a result, they all become hypocritical Pharisees and antichrists. Thus, they are cursed and condemned by God. Just like Paul, false leaders exalt and testify for themselves. They mislead and disturb people. They lead them astray and into religious rituals, and the way that these people believe in God becomes just the same as religious people, which delays their entry onto the right track in their faith in God. False leaders constantly mislead and disturb people, and those people then produce a host of pseudo-spiritual theories and sayings. These theories, sayings, and practices are diametrically opposed to the truth and have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Yet while false leaders are misleading and misguiding people, they take these things as positive things, as the truth. They mistakenly believe these things to be the truth, and think that as long as they believe in these things in their hearts and can say them eloquently, and as long as those things are endorsed by everyone, then they have gained the truth. Misguided by these thoughts and views, people are not only unable to understand the truth, but they are also unable to practice or experience God's words, let alone enter the truth reality. On the contrary, they grow ever further from God's words, and further still from entry into the truth reality. On paper, there is nothing wrong with the words false leaders say and the slogans they shout. They are all correct. Why then do they achieve nothing at all? This is because what false leaders understand and comprehend is simply too shallow. It is all the stuff of doctrine, which is irrelevant to the truth reality in God's words, God's requirements, or His intentions. The fact is that all the doctrines false leaders preach are far short of the truth reality. To be precise, they have nothing to do with the truth, nor anything to do with God's words. So, when false leaders often spout these words and doctrines, what is it connected to? Why are they always unable to enter the truth reality? This is directly connected to the caliber of false leaders. It is absolutely certain that false leaders are of poor caliber and lack the ability to comprehend the truth. No matter how many years they believe in God, they will not understand the truth or have life entry. And it can also be said that no matter how many years they believe in God, it will not be easy for them to enter the truth reality. If a false leader is not dismissed and is allowed to keep their position, what sort of consequences will ensue? Their leadership will draw ever more people into religious rituals and regulations, into words and doctrines, and into vague notions and imaginings. In contrast to antichrists, false leaders do not lead people to come before them or before Satan, but if they cannot lead God's chosen people into the truth reality of His words, will God's chosen people be able to attain His salvation? Will they be able to be perfected by God? Absolutely not. If God's chosen people cannot enter the truth reality, are they not still living under Satan's power? Are they not still degenerates being held under Satan's power? Does this not mean that they will come to ruin in the hands of a false leader? That is why the consequences of the work of false leaders and antichrists are basically the same. Neither can make God's chosen people understand the truth, enter reality, and achieve salvation. They both harm God's chosen people and bring them to ruin. The consequences are exactly the same. What are some of the heresies and fallacies of false leaders? Summarize them yourselves later. I leave this assignment to you to see whether you are able to discern them. Have the leaders around you ever spoken some words that are spiritual or accord with human sentiments and, on the surface, appear correct and in line with the truth, but fail to provide for your life entry and resolve your actual problems? If you don't have discernment of these words and even hold them dear and take them to heart, allowing them to dominate you and lead you all the time, and sway your thoughts and behavior all the time, aren't the consequences of this quite serious? Then it's essential for you to dig into the root of these issues, to find what things are heresies and fallacies that can make people degrade to the point where their faith in God turns into religious belief, resulting in them resisting God and being rejected by God. For instance, suppose that a person says, "Don't strive to become a leader." If you're dismissed or eliminated after becoming a leader, you won't even have a chance to be an ordinary believer. Is this kind of talk a heresy and fallacy of false leaders?
Yes.
Is it? The heresies and fallacies of false leaders must be distinguished from those of antichrists. Don't jumble them together. What does that person mean by saying such things? What motivations are hidden in these words? Is there something shady within them? Clearly, they contain a trick intended to mislead people. They mean that other people should avoid striving to be leaders, that doing so won't turn out well. Their aim in saying this is to make people abandon the idea of becoming a leader, so that no one will compete with them for reputation and status, thereby allowing them to feel at ease being a leader forever. At the same time, they are telling people, this is how God's house treats leaders and workers. It promotes you when it needs you, and when it doesn't, it kicks you to the very bottom rung, leaving you no chance to even be an ordinary believer. What is the nature of these words?
Blasphemy against God.
What kind of person speaks blasphemous words against God?
An antichrist.
Within these words, there are two evil intentions that can lead to two consequences. One is telling others to absolutely not vie for status, which ensures their own status remains secure. The other is making you misunderstand God, stop believing in God, and start believing in them instead. This is the most blatant kind of Antichrist. It seems you lack comprehension ability. I have spoken about examples of this before. You are not only careless and possessed of poor memory, your comprehension ability is also lacking. You can't even discern such an obvious Antichrist. Would false leaders say such things? Would they consciously and openly mislead people and resist God?
No.
Although the things that false leaders say and do may appear unproblematic on the surface, their work lacks principles and cannot achieve results. False leaders cannot resolve any of people's problems, bring them onto the right track of faith in God, or lead them before God. Everything they say is correct. They haven't skimped on their work at all. They have zeal and passion, and on the surface they appear to have faith, to have resolve, and to be willing to endure hardship and pay the price. Moreover, they appear to have incredible endurance and to be able to persevere through all manner of fatigue and difficulty. It's just that their caliber and comprehension ability are poor, and they lack an accurate comprehension of the truth. What do they do about this lack of comprehension ability? They use regulations and doctrines, as well as the spiritual theories they frequently talk about, to resolve this problem. After a few years under their leadership, all kinds of doctrines, regulations, and external practices arise among people. People adhere to these doctrines, regulations, and practices, and believe they are practicing the truth and entering into the truth reality. But in fact, they are still very far from the truth reality. Once people's hearts are filled, dominated, and led by these things, resolution becomes troublesome. Each one must be dissected and analyzed individually so that people understand them. Then, people must be told what the truth, doctrines, slogans, and regulations are, and what correct comprehension of the truth, accurate sayings, and the truth principles are. All of these need to be resolved individually. Otherwise, those who are relatively well-behaved, rule-abiding, and who pursue spirituality will get misled and ruined by the false leaders. These people may appear devout, capable of enduring hardship and paying the price, and able to pray when things befall them. However, just like with religious people, when God comes back, none of them recognize Him. None of them acknowledge that God is doing new work again, and they all resist Him. Why is this? It is because false leaders and antichrists have misled them. They have harmed and ruined many sincere believers in God. False leaders only speak words and doctrines. What they get people to understand is just doctrine and not the truth, and what they make people see is just false spirituality. What are the consequences of speaking words and doctrines? False spirituality, false understanding, false knowledge, false practice, and false compliance. All of it is false. How does this falseness come about? It is caused by false leaders having a distorted, one-sided, and superficial comprehension of the truth, and totally failing to comprehend the essence of the truth. False leaders bring people a lot of rules, words, and doctrines, along with some slogans and theories. Those people don't understand God's true intentions at all. And when they encounter various complex situations, they don't know how to handle and approach them, or how to grasp God's intentions. Can such individuals come before God? Can they accept God and come to stop resisting Him? No, they cannot. Therefore, it is crucial and necessary for you to summarize the heresies and fallacies of false leaders and attain discernment of them. When summarizing, it is essential to differentiate them from the fallacies used by antichrists to mislead people. Regarding the second responsibility of leaders and workers, being familiar with the states of each sort of person and resolving the various difficulties relating to life entry they encounter in their real lives. We will conclude our fellowship dissecting the various practices of false leaders and the essence of the issues with false leaders here.